Hi there guys, and welcome to the Cover Zero show with me, your host Simon Conboy. This is the weekly review episode covering the week ending 24th of March 2017. So just got to throw out there quickly, apologies if you're expecting to see the finale of the franchise and draft review series today. It has been recorded and I was planning to get it up today. However, the editing process is going to be a bit more long-winded. I've got a lot of graphics and for the tables and some of the data there that's going to be along, provided with the episode, make it a lot more palatable. It is a long episode. It's clocked in a bit longer than I was hoping. I was expecting it would run pretty long, but it's a bit longer. I want it to be absolutely perfect, so I've got prior plans, unfortunately. Will not be able to get that for you today. It will be Sunday is when I'm aiming to get that done, as I am busy this evening and tomorrow. Editing process is taking a fair while, but I assure you that will be up. So for today, I've already recorded the news section, as well as which is covering the free agent signings that have taken place since the last weekly review episode, and also covering some of Goodell's statements about potential rule changes, my opinion on those. So I'm going to post those up, along with, just to keep with the theme for the week, my 10 favourite and my 10 least favourite draft classes during the 2007 to 2016 period, the time frame that has been covered by the series. Hopefully this will tide you guys over. Again, sincerest apologies. I really need that episode to be perfect, because I've really enjoyed the series and it coming together. It's a really good episode. I'm sure you guys will enjoy it. It's really informative. I'm very happy with how it's turned out. Just as I say, it'll be up Sunday. I hope you enjoy it. Please do check it out, especially if you've enjoyed the series so far. It really will bring everything together nicely and tie everything up. So, as I say, those other bits have been recorded earlier. I'll post up those news bits. They will be on the end of this particular recording. And I will get on with my 10 favourite and my 10 least favourite. So we'll start with the least. Let's get the negativity out of the way. So, rocking in at number 10 in my least favourite draft classes from 2007 to 2016, we've got the then St. Louis Rams 2010 draft class, that of Sam Bradford with the first overall selection, who did not really pan out as they'd hoped. Injuries, of course, there. Roger Saffold, the tackle, just was not a particularly good player. And Jerome Murphy, the defensive back. None of those three players worked out. That's three high picks in the first 3 rounds. All of them busts. That's a poor job. Bradford is a bit of a harsh one, but for a first overall pick, has to be considered a bust for his time with that franchise. Moving on to the number 9, we got another 2010 draft class. We've got the Bills of that year. So they traded up to get CJ Spiller. His career there, one really good season, other than that, underwhelming. He was a bust. Terrell Troop, the defensive lineman, he was a bust. And Alex Carrington, the defensive lineman, he was a bust. Same story really as the Rams. 3 selections in the first 3 rounds. None of them worked out. Poor class. Bad times. Moving on to the number 8 selection, we've got the 2009 Denver Broncos. This was an interesting one. Robert Ayers was a solid first round, well, not solid, but fine first round pick. However, they had 2 first rounds that year. Noshawn Moreno was a bust. Alfonso Smith, the defensive back, he was a bust. Darcel McBuff, he was a bust. And that's just not good enough. Again, much like that, 3 busts in the first 3 rounds. That is a poor job. So that was another poor class. Number 7, once again, visiting Tampa and my beloved Buccaneers, the 2007 Buccaneer draft class. Oof, I remember this one very well. Gaines Adams, 4th overall selection, didn't work out at all. He was a bust. Aaron Sears and Sabi Piscatelli, the guard and safety, both selected in round 2. They were also busts. They didn't achieve anything with their time in the league. Bad class. 3 picks, all pretty high up, none of them working out. sticking to this is a bit of a theme actually, because I think that was a really good draft, especially that first round. We've got the Colts coming in at number 6 that same year. Anthony Gonzalez, the wide receiver, he was a bust. Tony Hugo, the offensive tackle, he was a bust. Quinn Pitcock, he was a bust. And Hughes, defensive back, John Hughes it might have been, not sure. Either way, that's 4 busts in the first 3 rounds. That's a poor draft right there. Sticking to the 07 draft class with number 5, we've got the Oakland Raiders, who had the first overall selection. Of course, Jamarcus Russell, he was a bust. Then we've got Johnny Lee Higgins in the 3rd, Mario Henderson in the 3rd. They were also busts, and Quinton Moses, he was a bust. 4, especially first overall pick being one of the all-time draft busts. This class possibly could have been higher. However, with number 4, I've got a bit of a special one here. The 2012 Skins, simply because they gave up so much for Robert Griffin. That pick had to work out. Of course, stellar rookie season, and then fell off a cliff, washed out of Washington. Looks like he may wash out of the league at this stage. It is the one player really, but at the end they gave up so much that it was several players, and they all accounted to one massive bust. It's affected the franchise massively since. Of course, you lose that many picks, your potential depth is hurt. So that one has to rank high. I was tempted to give it number 1, but I didn't. I think 4 is about fair. Now, the 2013 draft class, I've criticised this one all the time. Got a couple here. At number 3, we got the Dolphins 2013 class. Dion Jordan with the 3rd overall pick. Yeah, that was a bust. Jamar Taylor, that was a bust. A couple other picks in the 3rd. Dallas Thomas, just none of them working out. Dion Jordan they traded up for as well. No good came from that draft for the Dolphins. Poor job there. Similarly, second worst class, we've got the Tennessee Titans of that same year. Chance Warmack, the guard in round 1. Justin Hunter and Bleedy Ray Wilson in round 2. All busts, and Tavares Gooden, the linebacker. High picks. None of them worked. Every single one a bust. That was a disastrous class. And then at number 1, we've got the 2014 Cleveland Browns class. Now, honourable mention also to the 2012 Browns class. I think the combination of the two is shocking. 4 first-round picks, all of them busts. This particular draft was Justin Gilbert. I believe it was the 8th overall selection. Johnny Manziel, both clear busts. Terrence West in the 3rd. It's not too bad there, but really this one's a tribute to the Browns overall, and those 2 drafts were just drastically poor. Of course, they traded up for Manziel as well, which makes it look even worse. Oof, that was an ugly year to be a Browns fan. There was so much hope coming out of that class. So those are my least favourites. So let's get on to a more positive topic. My 10 favourite classes from this time frame. Got a couple of honourable mentions here, and I'll get to them afterwards. We've got the 2010 Pats rocking in at number 10. Devin McCourty being a very good player. Gronk, arguably the greatest tight end of all time in round 2. Brandon Spikes was a solid contributor. Aaron Hernandez, if it wasn't for the incident that landed him in jail, he was a great value pick for them. That's 4 really decent players they managed to pick up. Spikes, maybe not really, but Spikes was solid and did a job for them. Good class all around. At number 9, we got the 2012 Colts. This is the draft where they picked up Andrew Luck. But on top of that, they got small offense around him. They got T.Y. Hilton, obviously fantastic player, great pick there. And a pair of tight ends in the 2nd, Dwayne Allen, Gabe Fleener, who maybe haven't achieved as much as they should, but they're at the worst solid players, even though I don't particularly rate Fleener. But that draft was so important to this franchise. Had to have Andrew Luck work out, and it has. And getting him T.Y. Hilton has certainly helped. Moving on to number 8, we've got the 2015 Bucks. Now, I mentioned this on Sunday. There's a couple. The Bucks and the Raiders, their scores are really indicative of how important one particular draft class was. Otherwise, they were going to be right down at the bottom of those ratings. They're still pretty low, but this draft class has really helped stabilise this franchise. Bear in mind, before this draft, they were one of the worst offences I've ever seen. They managed to select Jameis Winston with the first overall pick. He's been good thus far. Expect to see him continue to progress. But also getting 2 starting offensive linemen in Donovan Smith and Ali Marpet. Marpet in particular looking like a very good player at this point. And Quan Alexander, the linebacker in the 4th, who's a tackling machine. A very good player. That's a great draft to get 4 starters, especially at the most important position, stabilise the offensive line. That was at the moment looking like an important class for this franchise going forward. We've got a similar story at number 7 with the 2014 Raiders. Khalil Mack in the 1st, then Derek Carr, and they got Gabe Jackson, who's a fairly solid lineman, in the 3rd. That is the building block draft for this franchise, of course. Defensive MVP last year, Derek Carr, an MVP candidate going in before the injury. So yeah, that's very similar to the Bucs one. Great draft, really has laid a foundation for this team to build on. Coming in at number 6, we've got the 2010 Steelers class. This is a fascinating one. There were some good drafts that year. We've got Pouncey, Antonio Brown and Emmanuel Sanders. There's 3 Pro Bowl talents there. Antonio Brown, of course, one of the best receivers of all time. He really is what escalates that class into this discussion. That's just nailed it. Offense on a stick kind of draft there. At number 5, we've got the 2008 Falcons. Again, this is one of those where it's just so essential to this team. They were right down there, after the Michael Vick debacle at this point, and they came out and had an absolutely fantastic draft. So we got Matt Ryan in round 1, 3rd overall pick. Curtis Lofton was a good middle linebacker for them. Harry Douglas contributed for a while. Thomas Deku was a good safety for them, and Croy Bierman. Just a rock solid draft. Gave them a bit of help on several levels. Picking up 5 contributing players is a very good job, and of course a starting quarterback for the next decade. Great job there. What a class that was. Absolutely important that the franchise nailed it that year, and they did. Moving on, we've got the 2013 Lions. The Lions rank very badly in their score, but this class certainly helped keep that score from being even lower. If you're talking about, in the worst, I mentioned a lot of teams that went 1, 2, 3 and just missed on every single one. This is the opposite. They hit on all 3 picks. Ezekiel Ansah in the 1st, Darius Slay in the 2nd, and Larry Warford in the 3rd. That's superb. Great players, all 3 of them. So yeah, love that class. That was a good job. The 3rd, this draft is just quality. The Chiefs from 2008. Now, whilst Glenn Dorsey was a bust, they also got Brandon Albert in the 1st round that year. They got a pair of corners in Brandon Carr and Flowers, and Jamal Charles in the 3rd. That's the quality of those 4 as starters for this team was high. I mean, Jamal Charles is an all-time great running back. Even if he may not necessarily receive that credit, he is. Had some amazing years. Albert was a really good left tackle for them. Flowers and Carr have had long, productive careers at cornerback. That's a superb draft right there. Then we've got a couple of, staying on the West Coast actually, the Western Divisions. Chiefs aren't really a West Coast team. We got the Seattle Seahawks 2010 draft class. Wow, was this a big class for what this team ended up, is to this day. So Russell Okung, who I didn't give a solid to, but was a fine player for them while he was there, in the 1st. Earl Thomas also in the 1st. Golden Tate in the 2nd, and Cam Chancellor in the 5th. Yeah, you've got 2 of the top safeties in the NFL. A solid left tackle while he was there, and a starting wide receiver. That's a great draft by any measure. Really big fan of Chancellor and Thomas in particular. That's one of the reasons it ranks so high on this list. And then at number 1, this one might be a surprise to some, but I just think this is, if you could have a draft like this 2-3 years in a row, you are set up for a long, long time. The 2007 49ers draft class. Patrick Willis and Joe Staley in round 1. Both superb players. Willis, one day going to the Hall of Fame. I've got no doubt about that. Deshaun Goldson, Terrell Brown, and Ray McDonald. That's a really good draft. You've built a majority, a player at every level of the defense: a corner, a linebacker, a defensive, safety, and a defensive lineman. All valid contributors, of course. Willis being and then Joe Staley, a future Hall of Famer in Willis and Joe Staley. That's absolutely fantastic. 5 players in one draft, and this really helped with their score when it came to the rankings, of course. So there you have it. They're my top 10s. Again, my sincerest apologies for not being able to get the stats up today. As I say, check that out on Sunday. Hope you really enjoy it. Coming up next, we've got the signings for the last week and some of the stuff that Goodell said, my opinion on that. So stay tuned for those. Thank you very much for checking it out. Go Bucks. Getting into the show, beginning with the week's signings. Not going to cover all of them, just some of them. Ones I think are significant or could have significance. So, beginning with the New Orleans Saints, they signed linebacker Manti Te'o to a 2-year deal, $5 million. This is a very Saints-feeling signing. I mentioned this before. They like linebackers who struggle in coverage. Te'o has been that in his time in the league. He's also had some injury problems. It's not a lot of money. He's still young. It'll be interesting to see if they can get anything out of him, but I've got to say I'm pretty dubious at this point. The Packers signed defensive lineman Ricky Jean-Francois to a 1-year, $3 million deal. I think this is a solid signing. He'll provide some depth. A veteran player, good against the run, not so good in pass rush department, but he'll give them a solid rotational player. Good 2-down lineman. So not much in the contract. Pretty good deal there. The Steelers have made a pair of signings. Tyson Alualu, the defensive lineman formerly of the Jags, 2 years, $6 million. Hasn't really shown too much in his time in the league. Expect to see him as part of the rotation. Yes, maybe a bit much money, but there's a degree of talent there. I'll be interested to see if they can get anything out of him. They also signed Cody Sensabaugh, defensive back, to a 2-year, $2.6 million deal. I don't know how much we'll see of him. He'll just provide depth. Not much money there. Don't expect it to be a hugely impactful signing. The Cincinnati Bengals made a couple of signings. They've brought back Andre Smith, the Giant offensive lineman. Had a bit of an up and down career. Makes sense to sign with the Bengals. They know him as well as any franchise does. So a 1-year deal, $3.25 million. I think it's a pretty reasonable sign. They need the offensive line help, of course, with Whitworth leaving, and they don't know what they've got with Jake Fisher and Ogubehi. I'll get that name right one episode, I promise. So I expect to see him start. They can maybe plonk him in at guard if need be. If those two work out a tackle. Pretty reasonable deal. This could be a good signing for them. And linebacker Kevin Minter, they've signed from the Cardinals. 1 year, $4.25 million. I think this is a good signing. They needed a bit more athleticism at the position. He will add that. Played pretty well last year for the Cardinals. Better coverage backer than what they've got. Only a 1-year deal. It'll be interesting to see how he does. But I think this is a really solid move. Good job there, Bengals. We've got the Oakland Raiders. They signed linebacker Jelani Jenkins to a 1-year, $1 million deal. Fell off last year for the Dolphins. He'd been a really good value selection for them. Played really well in his rookie campaign. Last year was a bit of a liability, but again, athleticism. The Raiders needed a linebacker, much like the Bengals did. So it's an upgrade in that department. How much he'll offer, I don't know. But at the end of the day, it's a 1-year, $1 million deal with pretty high upside and no risk attached. So this is potentially a really good signing. Credit to the Raiders for this one. The New York Giants have signed Geno Smith to be Eli Manning's backup. 1 year, $1.2 million. For that money, that's really good. He's got talent. Certainly more talent than a lot of backups. Of course, they never come together for him in the league. But yeah, can't really complain with that one too much. It's an improvement at that spot over Ryan Nassib, you'd have to think. And yeah, one of the lower paid backups in the league as well. So fine job there. And Jason Pierre-Paul has signed a contract extension, 4 years, $68 million with 54 mil in guarantees. Money's always big with pass rushers. I've mentioned this before. That's just how it is. He's been very good since he came back from the hand finger incident. Improved in his time in the league as a run player in particular. Still a solid pass rusher. Played very well last year before getting hurt. I think this is a solid move. You know, the players wanted this for a while now. Good to see it get done. Good for him. Good for the Giants. The Titans have signed Sylvester Williams, the former first-round pick of the Broncos, to a 3-year, $16 million deal. I liked him coming out of college, but he's not played well in the NFL to this point. I think the money here is a bit rich for my liking. I agree. Yeah, I understand it in terms of the Titans do need more defensive linemen. They've got Jarrell Casey and not too much else in terms of the starters there that you impact players. I again have gone on about Jonathan Hankins. He would have made a lot of sense. I think they probably could have got him for this kind of money, even a little more. Would have been a better signing for them. The money is just too much. He's not shown be enough. They're paying for the first round pedigree there, I think. We'll see what happens there, but not a big fan of this deal. The Jags have signed tight end Michael Rivera, formerly of the Raiders, to a 2-year, $6.75 million contract. Compared to all the other tight end signings, this is one of the better ones. He's wasn't used a huge amount in Oakland, but was a pretty efficient receiving tight end when they did go his way. I think this is a solid move. Good job there, Jags. The Seahawks have made a few. Bradley McDougald, formerly of the Bucks, he'll provide some safety depth. 1 year, $2 million. Pretty average player generally, but I think, yeah, good depth. If anything unfortunate does occur there, they can plonk him in. He'll probably be pretty effective for them. So, good move. Not much money there. Also, Deshaun Shedd has been signed 1 year, $1.5 million. That's just more depth at defensive back. Again, not much money in there. Pretty good move. And Luke Wilson, the backup tight end, has been signed to a 1 year, $3 million deal. Again, this is pretty reasonable. Solid insurance. You do need it because Jimmy Graham has been injured at times in his career. The Dolphins re-signed Kiko Alonso to a 4-year, $28 million deal with $20 million guarantees. I'm not a fan of the contract. I thought he played well for the Finns for the most part last year, but started to fall off toward the end of the year. He's had injuries throughout his tenure in the NFL. If the contract was half, like if it was a 2-year extension with this kind of money, I'd be a bit more willing, because I don't think it's the long-term risk here. It is what I don't like, and I do think the money even then is still a bit rich for my blood. They do need linebackers desperately. They still do. We'll see how this one works out. Not a big fan of the contract in a minute, but it could pan out if he stays healthy and plays as well as he can, particularly in that outstanding rookie year he had. We will see. The Jets, Morris Claiborne, I think this is one of the best deals of free agency so far. 1 year, $5 million deal. Jets had a huge need at that spot. Claiborne played particularly well last season. Injuries have been a problem throughout his career. Of course, missed a chunk of time last year as well. It's the reason he only got the contract he did. Also, he's a bit of a 1 year wonder. There's a lot of upside here. There's no risk. Jets needed this type of an upgrade in that backfield. This is a good move. It suits the Jets. Probably not what Claiborne was hoping for, but if he plays as well as he did last year and can avoid injuries, I expect he'll get a pretty good payday next year. And lastly, I believe I spoke about this one already, but I'm just going over it again. Dontari Poe signing with the Falcons, 1 year, $8 million. Good deal, suits both sides. It's a decent amount of money for Poe. Obviously, he was hoping for a long-term contract. That didn't happen, but a pretty reasonable signing. They needed help on the defensive line. This will give them that, even if it may only be for the 1 year. But he should be motivated, should play well in his quest for that long-term contract. Definite upgrade there, good move. That's it for the free agents. So moving on to some of Roger Goodell's statements that he's made in the last week or two. He has stated, for one thing, that the NFL is going to reconsider the sort of amount of adverts on during game, try and shorten the viewing experience. This is something that has been needed for a while. The NFL, for one thing, is trying to improve its standing internationally, really grow the game outside of just the States. this, I think, is essential for American viewers. The amount of adverts, they're a bit more used to it. For viewers outside that, not necessarily the case. As well as that, you're competing with football, which is traditionally 2 hours. That's kind of what people are used to allotting. Same with rugby, even though it's significantly less popular. But that's the sort of time frame people are used to allotting to watching sports. 3 hours with the amount of ads, it is a tough ask, especially for new fans, to set aside that kind of time. Especially because the adverts can be particularly frustrating. Now, if you're watching in a group, I think it's a much more pleasant experience. You probably have more than one game on. You can, watch whatever game doesn't have ads on. But when you're on your own, it can be infuriating sometimes, and especially when there's a long drive. And I'm sure most of you will understand this one. Like, there's a long drive, team scores a touchdown, cuts the extra point. Sometimes they'll have ads before the extra point. I hate that, but they'll do the extra point and then there'll be adverts, and then they'll come back just for the kickoff, and then more adverts, and it can really break the moment. You can be really into the game, and then ads just sort of stop it. The adrenaline can drop. It can be frustrating. The game doesn't need to be that long. Something I've tried to explain to people who've tried to get into the game, they're like, oh, but it's so stop. But the game, inherently it is, of course, due to the nature of being on a play-by-play basis. But you could probably run an NFL game in like 2 hours, 2.5 hours, I think, would be a good amount of time. 2.5, definitely. If they can cut half hour out, that would be fantastic. It'd make the game far more digestible for the average fan. And just trying to explain, like, it is, the advertising companies. That's the reason the game goes on so long. If you go see a game live, then you get those points where the players just stood around on the field waiting for adverts to happen. It seems somewhat absurd, really. If this is a move that ends up happening, I applaud the NFL for it. I think it's necessary in terms of trying to accelerate the growth of the game, and it will just. I can't imagine anyone outside of advertisers and possibly the networks being unhappy about this. It just makes the viewing experience better for everyone. I hope this happens. Please make this happen. The other mention has been regarding player celebrations. So when I first sort of started getting into the game, celebrations, of course, some of them were quite excessive. That only got worse as T.O. and Chad Johnson / Ocho Cinco had a kind of celebratory arms race of sorts. So, of course, the NFL clamped down on those, thought it was taking away from the game. It's got to the point now where it is far too draconian. We had a couple of egregious examples in the last few years. A couple from last year, like the Michael Crabtree one, was ridiculous in week 1. You had the Saints and the Raiders, right at the end of the game. Raiders appear to score what's going to be a game-tying touchdown, choose to go for 2. Crabtree makes the 2-point conversion and celebrates with a little bit too much joy for the NFL and gets a 15-yard flag. Like, just when you consider the context of that play and how great a moment it is, of course he's going to be excited. That was a big moment in the game. It was an exciting game. It was a shootout, no defense played whatsoever. He's not done anything that could be deemed offensive. It's not been what I would consider excessive, and he's been flagged. It was that really irritated me. Another one, this one's a bit of a homer pick to some degree, but I think it gets the point across. It was a game where Gerald McCoy got through like a double team for a sack on a 3rd down. Obviously, team gets off the field, and him and I believe it's the other defensive tackle, McDonald, and they just sort of do that opposite each other. Literally what you just saw there, like that for about 2 seconds, and it got flagged. And it was just ridiculous. Like, it's a great play. Again, not harming anyone. It's not taking an overly long time. Like I expect, even if something is done here, they're still not going to allow props. And anything, clearly too heavily choreographed, like some of the, again, Chad Johnson, the T.O. ones, some of Steve Smith's were a bit like that. The Joe Horn one, which is, by the way, that's my favourite with the mobile phone. That sort of thing, I imagine, will still be flags, but it has been a bit draconian. Of course, everyone's seen the no fun league term. I'd imagine surely the NFL wants to shed that image. if they can just tone it down, there needs to be a balance achieved here. Penalising teams for players making great plays and then showing their excitement is ridiculous, and it has been annoying for a while. I hope they can find some balance here and sort this issue out. So I will now get off my soapbox